That's the one.
At the bottom. Can use this one. Yeah.
Just staying close to it, right? Yeah. Good afternoon. Hello, hello. Good afternoon. Hey, we're live. And welcome to the 2022 Charleston ASALH Carter G. Woodson birthday celebration. I want to congratulate you all for coming out. This is the first time in 3 years that we've been able to gather, and it's wonderful being able also to gather here back home in the Avery Research Center. I'd like to open the meeting. By the way, my name is Jerry Harris. I'm president of the association here in Charleston. I'd like to open the meeting with lift every voice and sing. We are blessed to be able to be in a facility that has technology. That's who we are today. That's the agenda. And now, the very voice.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring. Ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening sky.
Let it
resound.
Let it resound.
Loud as the rolling sea.
I like this part right here. Come on.
Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on.
Let us march on.
Till victory is won.
Now we add a little something to it. Just to encourage you. We're gonna take you to church right now. Let's go.
We'll keep marching, fighting till the victory is won.
To all my brothers out there.
Hold your head up, brother, till the victory is won.
To all my sisters in the struggle.
Keep believing, sister, till the victory is won.
Till that day.
Till that day comes.
Hey.
Let us march on.
To victory.
Till victory is won. Is won.
Right. She's standing near the mic, I'd like to ask Aisha Finkel, the partners here, Avery, to give us a welcome to Avery.
Okay, I probably can't see me because I'm short and the thing is tall. Okay, hello everyone. Actually, I got my archival service here at the Avery Research Center, and I'm so glad to be with you this morning, or afternoon now, I guess. I'm pleased to welcome you to 125 Bull Street, the home of the historic Avery Noble Institute. And so we are archive, library, museum now today at the Avery Research Center. And you're in the newly technology with the McKinley Washington auditorium with our screens and our cameras. One of the things that we were able to accomplish while we were closed. So I won't belabor the point, and then happy birthday to Carter Woodson. Thank you all.
Blessed to have
And then my name is I'm really excited to be here. The fellowship is so thank you so much.
Thank you. And we're glad to be on your campus. Each year, each branch is asked to do 4 things. And one of those 4 things is have a celebration of Dr. Carter Woodson's life. He's born on December 19th in 1875. Many of you, most of you in the room, I see the cues. He was, Dr. Woodson was a Q. And so I'm sure they're familiar with the history. But nonetheless, we've got a short Black history lesson about Carter G. Woodson. Video.
Woodson is popularly known as the father of Black history.
Adrienne Cannon knows all about Carter G. Woodson. She's the Afro-American History and Culture Specialist for the Manuscript Division of the Library of Congress. The library is the keeper of 18,000 items from Woodson's collection of papers that he started donating back in 1929. Everything from a letter from Paul Laurence Dunbar High School here in Baltimore to a manuscript of a poem by Dunbar, slave bills of sale, and slave freedom papers.
The collecting, research, writing, and publishing he did on the Black past in the early 20th century laid the foundation for the study of African American history as a legitimate field of inquiry.
Carter G. Woodson was born in 1875 in New Canton, Virginia, to former slaves.
I think that that connection to slavery was the impetus for his interest in recording the Black past.
Woodson worked in the coal mines of West Virginia as a young man, but went on to earn his bachelor's and master's degrees, eventually going to Harvard on an American history scholarship.
He was the only African American born to former slave parents to receive a PhD in history. And he was the second African American to receive a PhD in history from Harvard. The first was W.E.B. Du Bois.
Woodson also served as a teacher, a principal, and a publisher. He wrote The Negro in Our History. He started the publication Journal of Negro History in 1916. And to help teachers with African American studies, he created the Negro History Bulletin. The historian and writer of more than a dozen books lobbied schools and organizations to take part in a special program to encourage the study of Black history.
It was celebrated first as Negro History Week, and it was celebrated the second week in February to encompass the birthdays of Abraham Lincoln and Frederick Douglass.
He chose that week in order to reach Blacks and whites because he believed recording and disseminating Black history could advance race relations.
As he indicated in his textbook, The Negro in Our History, was to celebrate not Negro history, but the Negro in all history, in our history.
Lisa Robinson, WBAL TV 11 News.
So that's a quick, very quick snapshot people in the room who've done more strenuous and detailed work like Don West, to bring much more to this discussion. But one of the things that, in one of my late notes that sent out to folks was to ask them to take a look in their library to see if they found any books with reference to Dr. Woodson, either in the index or the bibliography or footnote. Anybody do that homework? The personal library.
You mentioned the fraternity. From the fraternal side, our national bulletin, which is the Oracle, first published in 1919. And Dr. Carter G. Woodson was featured in that bulletin. This was 4 years, certainly, before started. But in 1919, that's a bit that we had in our kind of library there. I mentioned the fact of him being a member of the fraternity, but he was in the very first bulletin published, which is called the Oracle, 1990.
The Omega Psi Phi fraternity is credited with helping to launch Black History Week, which is growing, and we are much appreciative of the institutional membership of the local chapters of Omega Psi Phi and their system support. Anybody else to go? Don. I know Don. I know Don.
I have a number of books, and what's really nice about it is that we often think about the 1920s and the many things that took place, including, of course, the Renaissance of Black history and culture. And Wilson builds on that. And that was also an incredible period in terms of the publications of a lot of things. Of course, then the 30s come around and a lot of these publications go away. And so a number of history books often, a number of African-American history books often cite Carter G. Woodson and Darlene Clark Hines, what is the title? She has two, African-American Odyssey, even acknowledge him in the beginning of the book for his long effort to bring about this topic and to put it in front of America and anyone else to recognize the importance of and the contributions by African Americans. There are a number of books in my library that do that.
Anybody else? Well, I did, anybody? I did go through mine. I was actually surprised by some of the books that did not have reference to Carter G. Woodson. But some that did, Before the Mayflower, Jerome Bennett's books, John Hope Franklin and many of his books, historians of Black history books had references. I also found it interesting in a book about biography of Ralph Bunche, who makes reference to Woodson as a dean at Howard, who got fired by the president, right, because of his confrontation, and I found that interesting. On the back table, there's a couple of books from my collection with the year in which they're kind of insert in terms of where the Woodson reference is. The earliest one I found was New Negro, published in 1925. Woodson's works are referred to in the bibliography. Some of his early writings referred to in the bibliography. But it's interesting if you move forward, the 1971 biography, or autobiography of Benjamin Mays, his famous president of Morehouse College, makes in his retrospect, makes that mention of Woodson as being the forerunner of the current Black history movement. And he makes comments about him not thinking President Lay's not worrying about whether or not it's a major, right, a course, set aside specifically, or whether it was integrated through the entire curriculum. Comments written in 1971 that might as well get today. Moving forward, the president of Rutgers University, Jonathan Holloway, published a book in 2021, a very short history, and I've got that on the back page. And then on page 3, he makes reference to Howard Woodson, Dr. Howard Woodson, Carter G. Woodson, who's about from Shiloh Baptist Church, and another graduate of Morehouse. A former pastor. Sorry about that. Makes reference to Carter G. Woodson as a seminal source of work for the modern work around Black history. So his legacy lives on, and we're here to celebrate his 147th birthday. And thank you for being here. A couple of people said they got to leave early, and one of them is our partner in crime, Robert Crawford. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the Emancipation Parade upcoming?
Pop in and hear more about real quick, the Emancipation Proclamation, New Year's Day. January 1, New Year's Day. We have, of course, recognized services in Charleston. We have a program that's scheduled. I'm working with the report that we've been one time here in church. And we're going to start here in 7 o'clock here. If they come January 1. January 1. Here we will celebrate 160 years of the signing of the So in Charleston, we've got a legacy that we've been 157 out of 150. So I feel we already know that. And educate our purpose as well as some of the main cause. But real quick, anybody here celebrated in the military? Army or Navy? Any? Well, anybody was in the Army. There you go. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Well, a lot of people don't recognize that because of the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation, Black men and women were able to join the military, the United States military. And that changed the course of the war. Long story short, we will, in New York and other cities, men retired, white men retired dying for us. The war had gone on and many people had gotten killed. Many of them lost family members, loved ones, and they retired. Well, President Abraham Lincoln, of course, said, hey, man, we need to still change the course of this history. And so Black men eventually were able to join the U.S. military. Now they can wear that U.S. seal on their shoulder pads or on their belt buckle, changing the course of being a part of the country now. Now, instead of being slaves, now they were runaways who joined the military. There are men who were able to join the military, carry weapons, and come back and defend and free their own time, their children. So there's a lot of rich history in the Emancipation Proclamation signing. There's a lot of great stories that have come out of this moment. And in Charleston on January 1, as I said, at 2 p.m. this year, we will have the parade in downtown Charleston. The parade lineup time starts around 11:30, 12 p.m. I know it's the first Sunday. I know a lot of pastors will be tied up with their church services, but we have worked it out with many of them so that you can be a part. This year, we've changed some of the things. We will take the parade this year down to the International African American Museum where we will disband after we pass Gassenboro Park. And we have a short program also planned towards Gassenboro Park, where we've partnered with District 20. So we got some youth programs involved here. We're going to attempt to have a gospel sing out where we'll have a little music and we'll have a word as well in the same couple hours. From, preaching, short preaching. I say short preaching, I better get in trouble with that. But we'll have a word from God. So we invite each and every one of you to participate in any way, shape, or form you desire. We do have a website set up so that if you're able to join us, you desire to be a part of the celebration, we welcome you. So please sign up by December 23rd if you can, so we can get you in the early parade portion of it, okay? But that's all I have at this time, and I thank you all for this opportunity.
So as you know, our theme actually a more appropriate way to begin talking about the proclamation. And so that's the first step, right? Move from there into discussions around Dr. Martin Luther King, then Black History Month, and then on our calendar, probably the next significant event is Remembrance Celebration. This year, we were blessed to come back again. It's like this has been a year, right? After COVID, we've been locked down, not able to come together. But in June this year, we were able, Park Service and the wonderful committee to put together what was a remarkable event. At that event, it was the 25th annual. And I'm blessed. Like, I've been working with these 5 years. All right. So I got, become the president, hang out at the 25th and celebrate. At the 25th, we were able to celebrate not only and remember our ancestors who died in the Middle Passage and those who, but also we acknowledge the leadership of those who founded that activity. One of those leaders not able to attend, Jose Chandler, was not there. But we thought appropriate in terms of celebrating that we would provide him with the recognition that we can hope to. Yeah. Right, as you know, Regina and Don is all. Yeah. Follow on the same people all the time. High quality work. What they did is that this was actually inspired by our presiding elder, Bruce Grandpa, who thought it appropriate that in the 25th year we recognize Deborah, right, and Jose as the co-founders of the Charleston Remembrance. Just like you have this for you. Thank you very much. No, you do. I was in Barbados back in October. That's not why we were there. We went to figure the idea. But one of the things I learned, first of all, the meeting translation they have now of some of the sites, there's some people African in those mounds and very democratic that. And it stopped. And it did a vibration just like what we do every second Saturday in June. And I was touched in my heart because they're doing it here. We formed ICANN, the International Committee to commemorate the African American ancestors of the Middle Past. We got about 25 organizations worldwide, and now Barbados is going to be one of those as well. So thank you very much. Invite you all to the next session. All right. So, members is such an important activity, for us to do, thinking about the rhythm of the calendar, about September. Actually, we kind of have a Memorial Day, and it's a significant history of African Americans, in this community, being at the forefront of South Memorial Day. We then have remembrance day, and all of the activities happening in summer. Then we, get ready to go to the national conference this year in Jacksonville. And the theme will be Black resistance. We are anxious to make certain that as many of our institute members and organizations, actually prepare presentations, because we've got an inside kind of line on this because, Aisha is the vice president of the program. Two things. We got a national president, Barbara Lane, who, when he was here, director of the Avery, was actually, fundamentally at the base of creating them. We got the vice president, so we really have no choice, but to go out and show up, in September in any kind of way. Also in September, maybe they begin before we go to Jacksonville, we have the opportunity to hang out at the local gas. That Dr. Bell, our theme this year is also wrong. As we talk about Black resistance, you can't resist without being helped. We have the opportunity to do that. Then we go to Founders Day, and then that's kind of the flow for us. In between the work that our friends and partners are doing, we'll try to support, but we're asking you to be actively engaged and pay attention. All right. Dr. Woodson, in his thinking, that Negro History Week was the week in which you reported out, demonstrated, produced, what you had researched during the course of the year. Now, what we do now is find what somebody else did, right, and celebrate that. So our challenge as we here, celebrating Black resistance, think about what is it that we're doing. And our next activity, which kind of came out of a conversation, Daniel Tessa, Bobby Manuel, just before the concert, on the letter choir, is Omar. We started to talk about hospital, and people were talking about what they remember, but as importantly, what has been done to remember the strike, all right? And what remains to be done for the same issue that the essential workers had in 1969. During COVID and currently. So we thought we'd have a conversation about with some of our members who were around in 1969, some who had been involved in some of the attempts and we'd like to have them now join us up front. Dr. Bell, Margaret Simon, and Don West. Our distinguished panel. Hi, Leticia, glad you could join us. You can hear me?
Pause. Okay. Testing. Test, test.
Testing. Testing.
Testing, testing.
Testing.
Test, test.
So we may not get everyone. If not, we just-
Band working. Testing. Testing. Okay. They just go first. Yeah. Mhm.
Jared, ask your question.
My question is, to the panel, where were you in the spring of 1969? And how did you experience the strike?
The military come in. We had the military come in and they were on every single street corner because they had a curfew. And they had big guns and I'd never seen anything like that. The second thing was it was really confusing. My uncle, Ed Shakti, was on the board of what was then called the medical college. And he was on the board and he was working with Stephen Colbert. Y'all know who I'm talking about. Stephen Colbert's daddy, Dr. James Colbert, to try and get the strike resolved. And so on the Shakti side of my family, they were very progressive. They wanted to get equal pay for equal work. And then there was my nuclear family, and I would come home and I would hear all these really ugly things. And yet I was in an integrated high school. So I was very confused and I had to be really careful about what I said at home or with my aunt and uncle or at school. So I think that's the main thing for me. I was really scared because it just felt scary for the military to take over, and then confusing because I was getting so many different feelings about it from my different parts of my family.
I remember the hospital strike very vividly. I was 22 years old at the time. I had just accepted a job at Charleston High School, which was an all-white high school at the time. They did not have any African-American teachers. I had come from Gaffney High School in Gaffney, South Carolina, where I was the first African-American to teach in an all-white high school in South Carolina. And I had been recommended because I got married and came to Charleston. I had been recommended by the superintendent at that in that district to the superintendent in Charleston to integrate Charleston High. At that time, I had already had a very negative experience trying to gain admission at the medical university. I had already been turned down as a medical student, as a prospective medical student at the medical university. So I was very, very interested in the strike. The other thing I think you should know is that I was very, very much involved in the movement. That's what we called it at that time. While I was a student at South Carolina State, I had already been arrested, spent 2 weeks in jail while I was a student at South Carolina State. But my dad, I remember my dad encouraging me to get my degree and then go protest. He did not want me to drop out of college. He reminded me that I had two siblings coming behind me, and if I dropped out, he wasn't going to pay for anything else. I need to go ahead and get my degree. The other thing that I need to remind you is that the hospital strike occurred in 1969. The Orangeburg Massacre occurred in 1968. Martin Luther King was killed in April of 1968. And as Margaret pointed out, I remember the strike very, very well. I was very defiant. I was quietly defiant. I was not a rah-rah person to go out and burn down stuff and get arrested, but I was quietly very, very much defiant. And I remember participating in the march. The reason that that's important is because at that time, African Americans who taught school were not encouraged to participate in that march because they would get fired. I just didn't give a damn. I had already been, I was already hired. I had already told my principal that I was going to participate. I was really on the side of the nurses that started the strike. There were about 60 women who started the strike. And from a historical standpoint, you need to understand that this was really the first time that women stepped out of their comfort zone and kind of merged civil rights and the labor movement. And I was just very, very impressed with that. The other thing I want to make you aware of is that I was in contact also with the first African-American student who went to the medical university at the time of the hospital strike. I knew of him. His name was Dr. Bernard Days. He was a graduate of Burke High School. He went on to become a very distinguished military person. He graduated from the medical university in about 1971. I had a chance to invite Dr. Days back to the medical university and talk to him about what he experienced during the time that he was there. It was very, very difficult for him. He talked about it. In fact, so much so, he was very angry about it, did not really want to come back to the medical university until about 1975, when I invited him to come back to the university. The other final thing I want to say is that in 1996, I had just been asked to be the director of diversity at MUSC. And we were in a president's meeting. And Raymond Greenberg, who was the president at that time, just kind of shocked everybody by saying, I think we need to do a commemoration of the hospital strike. It was the 25th year anniversary. Dr. Jim Edwards was a little bit hesitant about doing it, but the President's Council voted that we should do it. And I remember that's how I met Brother West. We had a commemoration, the 25th anniversary. Mary Moultrie was still living at the time.
So Doc, can we just put a pin in that? Because I'm wondering whether or not before we get into the commemoration,
Okay.
or anybody else who was in Charleston had memories of the strike that they want to share.
I was a little bit younger than Dr. Bell at the time, but I do remember the strike, and certainly our parents, I don't know whether they encouraged us, but we got involved in the march, and they also encouraged us when to get out of the march because they knew what would happen at some of the, at the end or culminating events. So I do remember it. Margaret, I do remember the National Guard, and do remember we took it as children, somewhat playing games. How far can we run out in the street before they see us and run back? So remember some of those memories.
Yes, I too remember. My mother was one of the ladies who walked out. Elizabeth Crawford. She was amongst that group. She was one of the first who was also locked up in the group. I remember them planning on the phone, calling each other, her, Miss White, and others having conversation, planning and talking about how to make this work, what we're going to do. Her and Miss Wilma Trey-Eye, for those who remember Miss Trey-Eye, they were locked up together. We stayed in the projects down here on East Bay Street at that time, and no, excuse me, America Street projects at that time. So I remember clearly us running out in the street, but we would go down in the parade. We marched every march. We attended every church service because my mother was there involved. And I remember her coming back home from being locked up that day. And she was excited because they had made the first step. They had made a change. And people may not remember her name, don't know her name, but she would go on later on as a recruit because she was one of the ones who actually signed people up to join the union, Elizabeth Crawford. She would later on go on and become the union president for the sanitation department here in Charleston.
So Dr. Bell, it's really interesting that I'm a senior in high school and I'm seeing you like every single day. And I don't have any idea that you were in that march. I don't have any idea that you were a part of the movement. And so I think that is something that I want everybody to realize, that people who look like me didn't have an idea what was really going on. And I was preparing a talk for Martin Luther King Day about 5 years ago, and I was starting to do some research for that talk. And I started thinking about the smartest African-American girl in my class who graduated with me. And her name was Elaine Jenkins. And I thought, gee, I wonder if she's still around, right? And so I Googled her, and it said, she's Elaine Jenkins, and she's an attorney. And I think she was with Africa University and headquartered in Tennessee. And it said that she was the youngest child of ASALH Jenkins. And I'm like going, what? And so we've gotten to be close. And so what I want to say about the hospital strike is that, and what Elaine and I have been talking about in the last few weeks, is that if you were a kid of African descent in Charleston, you knew exactly what was going on and you were involved. You knew exactly. If you were a white kid in Charleston, you were just you didn't have a clue. And that to me is one of the messages I want to get out to you all today, is that we were just clueless as high school students as to really what was going on. I mean, you were like the most beloved teacher in our high school. I mean, you were like the favorite teacher. You got the favorite teacher award senior year, right?
So Don?
No, my experience is very different. I'm not from here. I had studied Charleston several books before I arrived here. And then I arrived here and I worked at the Avery Research Center. And that was my task, trying to gather things together. A lot had already been done because Myrtle Glasgow was a civil rights activist. And she really brought that foundation to Charleston, which is an incredible story in and of itself when you talk about civil rights. This small city has really been at the forefront of so many things related to race and race relations. And so for me, it was just simply learning it all. And I got a chance to meet certain people, including your mother. I got a chance to meet Small Tree. Sometimes we would talk on the phone, and I don't want you to think that we had a long standing relationship. We didn't, but there were times that most of it was her calling me and asking me about some things, and then we would talk about a few other things. Over the years, there had been a lot of things done in terms of programming to bring these folks back together. And some of us may remember that the hospital strike presentation was part of the 2019 Wednesday program of the ASALH conference that was here. And I went to that. And I'm always learning new things about it. And so for me, it was where all of this body of work is located, and it's throughout the city. There are collections at the University of South Carolina in Columbia. Charleston Library, Special Collections has a collection. And of course, Avery has done great work, both before I arrived and then since. And there are a number of articles, a number of master theses. I know there's at least one doctoral dissertation that had been done. And most of us knew someone related to that period. And for me, it was that encounter that was so unique in that I was from somewhere else, learning from these people. And all of us can think about the civil rights movement, and then Dr. King, who had already passed away. But the people who came here, including Coretta Scott King, the people from Hollywood who came, and the labor organizer, Walter Reuther. I came from Detroit here. I worked at the Reuther Library. And before I was doing other things, I thought at one time that my great interest would be in labor history and urban studies. So I went to that like a magnet. If there was a labor struggle, I was learning about it. And this one was really quite unique. And continue with that.
Sure. It's interesting, some of the reading, if you Google the strike, you'll note you'll note in 1199 talks about the union talks about how the Charleston strike was the first time that labor, the faith community in SCLC, all right, came together to make a movement that, so this was significant in that line of history. And again, being to come here, okay, it's just another bump, all right, on the history chart, all right, but it's not necessarily as significant. And we thought it important to have this conversation because this year we're talking about health and wellness. Next year we're talking about resistance, right? So this is the kind of a natural bridge. Doc, you were getting ready to tell us a little bit more about how the first commemoration came about. And
well, the way that I met Don, as I was pointing out, it was 25 years after the strike. The medical university had done nothing to commemorate the strike, and Ray Greenberg, who was the provost at the time, recommended to Dr. Edwards that we should have a 25th commemoration. And we did have that 25th commemoration, and that's how I met Mr. West, because he was the historian who kind of pulled everything together. But the people that participated in that commemoration was Mary Moultrie, Bill Saunders, who was a leader in the 1199 project at that time. Leighton McCurdy, who was the dean of psychiatry, but was very, very much involved in the strike, and oftentimes gave advice to the president at the time that the strike was going on. The president at the time that the strike was going on was a guy by the name of McCoy, President McCoy. His background was very interesting because he came from South Africa, and he was just very resistant to the nurses that wanted to get increase in pay and wanted to be treated with dignity and respect. And that's pretty much what the strike was all about. I've had a chance to meet your mom and also be on programs with the surviving nurses, and it's still I'm impressed. Has had a dramatic effect on their life. One other thing I'd like to tell you, I was about to tell you some of the Bernard Days, who was the only African-American student at MUSC at the time of the strike. I had a chance to talk to him. And of course, all of the bad feelings from white people toward him, he experienced. And as a result, when he graduated from MUSC, didn't really want to ever come back, but he did eventually come back. One final thing, in the hospital, there's a commemoration, there's a plaque in the hospital when you walk into the old hospital, there's a plaque commemorating the 25th anniversary of the hospital strike. Not very much has been talked about as it relates to the hospital strike to medical students who have since graduated from the medical university. And based on my readings, not very much has been talked about the hospital strike, even to students who have graduated from high school. So we have a history here that a lot of people still do not understand and appreciate.
So the discussion about the commemoration, there's kind of a thought that if you don't have a sense of history, you may not be able to be motivated. All right. Or another way of putting it, the history can be therapeutic to you in terms of motivating. So what are your thoughts about how what we might be able to do as we move into 2023, celebrating Black resistance? What are the kind of things that we might need to do or want to do to lift up the hospital strike as a significant point in history? And that would motivate us to move forward in the future as we try to build on health and wellness in our community.
Well, one of the things I think should happen, we have only celebrated the hospital strike one time, in which I had the opportunity to participate in which the mayor, he was the mayor of Atlanta at the time, Andrew Young. Andrew Young came back and participated in a commemoration that Roper Hospital and the Medical University had about 2 years ago. I thought that that was something that was going to be annual, but it fell by the wayside for whatever reason. So I think that that's something that should continue to happen. Because as I pointed out, when you look back in history, you're going to find out that those ladies who decided to step out of their comfort zone and strike against the hospital, that was very, very significant. There were no men involved in that strike. That's the other thing that you should remember. There were no men, nowhere, no doctors, nobody else. It was just these 60 women. I think about 12, somewhere between 12 and 15 actually, were the hub of the strike. But I think that's very, very significant.
A very good points already made. And I would say our organization is good at bringing people together around history and culture and working with other groups. So let's seek out survivors now and see if we can bring them to a place like the Avery, along with inviting other groups to be part of it, especially certainly the nurses school at MUSC, where we can not necessarily ask them for anything, but to acknowledge them and to thank them for their efforts. Everyone talks about what they achieved here, but we don't realize that they achieved a lot more other places. And perhaps we can try to explain that, because there would be other nursing organizations and unions founded on what they were fighting for here. And especially what was big about this whole respect. Oftentimes we talk about especially what we know of the healthcare services and the quote bedside manner that is so important for those who are dealing with health issues and are, of course, seeking to be healed. And you hear about stories of how Black folks in the hospitals were talked to and treated. And that was significant because they talked about not only the work that they had did academically and still would get the lower paying jobs. And in fact, most of the time, many new white appointed people to the hospital, either hired or appointed to the hospital, had Black folks show them what to do and how to do it and so forth and so on, only then to be faced with really very disrespectful language. And so I would say to our organization, let's bring them back. Let's acknowledge them. And maybe bring in the nursing school over at MUSC. There are some who are still around. When Mary Moultrie passed away, I was not here in the area. I was out of the country and then also in another part of the country. And she deserved a lot of credit, but there are others out there. And I'm glad that Dr. Bell mentioned what women did. It's so strange that none of us are these women. None of us are this story. And that was also what got important national attention, that women had always been part of the civil rights struggle in many different ways, and especially behind the scenes. The women here were the leaders. And that was difficult for white men to deal with. They just knew that this was something very odd, and maybe even below them to deal with. You know, we're dealing with these Negro women who are seasoned. Many of them had already gone through workshops, gone through leadership training. Many of them were professionals, only except for in MUSC were they not being treated that way. So I hope we can come up with something. I'm looking at some of my members around the room, knowing that we'll come up with something.
Great question, Jerry. I'm almost certain that the timing is right for this with the museum opening in just a few weeks, because I'm fairly certain they've got an exhibit on the hospital workers strike in there. Almost certain that's in there. Is anybody certain? I'm almost certain. I'm almost certain. Yeah.
That is History International. I think so.
I think it's
there's
in
a
there.
portion
So,
of it,
yeah.
yes.
So I think it's a platform, and I think the time is now or soon. And what I think is that y'all are helping me really hear again is that what's so important is that these were women standing up to power. Women standing up to power, to white male power, not black men standing up to white men. It's black women standing up to white men. And so what comes to mind for me is we have been very fortunate, Bob and I have, my husband Bob and I, in that we were assigned an intern from the College of Charleston last semester, spring semester, who helped us with doing further research in addition to what we've done about my family and the domestic slave trade down around Broad Street. And when you find out what comes out this late spring, what in fact has now been researched, which is history lost to time, many people will be shocked. So what my idea is that since we are all seem to be so connected to the College of Charleston, is that we find, if we can find a graduate student, public history student that would be interested in being an intern for this project, and to maybe do some oral history with any of the people who are still alive that were a part of it. So, and that may have already been done, I don't know. And to also do an analysis of what was different for this particular movement led by women. And so that would be my idea, is get as a College Charleston student, because then that student could then turn that into a thesis, and then they could turn that into a book. And then we could have a book written all about an analysis of what this hospital workers strike, not only what their strategy was and how it worked, but the impact it had on this community and probably much of the country.
I spoke yesterday, had a long conversation with Dr. Rose Dolores Gibbs. For those of you who may not know, she's the first African-American woman to graduate from the Medical University. The hospital strike was already over at the time that Dr. Gibbs matriculated at MUSC. But she told me that she got a chance to mingle with the nurses that participated in the hospital strike at that time. Of course, they were very young, and she said that there was a certain amount of pride that those nurses had even after the strike. The other thing that you should know is that those nurses did not get everything that they wanted. Okay, a lot of people think that, you know, they got all of the things that they were striking against. That did not happen. What did happen was the medical university was essentially brought to its knees. When they met with Dr. McCoy and the person that Corbett, I think you said his name was? Yeah, he was the one.
Dr. James Colbert.
Yeah, he was the one who negotiated the settlement, but they did not get everything that they wanted to get at the time of the strike. But it elevated what was going on in Charleston. Also, Dr. Gibbs was telling me that Roper Hospital, which was across the street, they were watching very, very closely because they were as guilty as the medical university. It just didn't happen over there. Okay, so what those nurses did here at the medical university, and it wasn't called the medical university at that time, it was called, as you pointed out, the Medical College of Charleston. What those nurses did to elevate the respect that nurses have gotten all over the country, I really don't think is appreciated like it should be from a historical standpoint.
We got a question from the audience.
Building on what you were saying, I'm hearing and understanding, and I find this all very interesting and fascinating in terms of what the strike did within the medical community, be it the medical college or Roper. I'm curious to know, as I come here, the impact of this strike on Charleston outside of the medical community, because this is a pivotal, obviously a pivotal occurrence with the religious, the medical, civil rights kind of coming together. It's a major, bringing a major institution to its knees. It had to have impact. I can't imagine it did not have that impact outside. And I'm just curious, what was that? And I guess anticipating your answer, I think that is something that needs to be recorded and understood in terms of the history of this community.
I think I may be able to give you a little bit of insight on that. I'll tell you a brief story. I remember very well talking to Dr. Jim Edwards, who was not here during the strike, didn't have anything to do with it. But I remember after the meeting that we had, that we were going to commemorate 25th anniversary. I remember saying to him, I think you need to make an apology to the African-American community about the strike. And he refused to do it. So I knew that he was a very Christian man. And so I remember saying to him, Jim, even though you had nothing to do with the strike, you need to make an apology to the African-American community about that strike. And the next day he did. I read his apology to the press. It's interesting because 25 years later, that apology somehow or another got lost. And the Board of Trustees decided that they would make another apology. So I had to remind them that an apology was already made. In fact, I had a copy of it and I sent it to them because it was in the Post-Courier. But you may have remembered when I read that apology from Dr. Edwards. But to your point, I think that that's when certainly Dr. Edwards began to think about diversity and think about elevating minority affairs. One of the things that he was very interested in was increasing the number of African Americans matriculating at the medical university. A lot of that happened during my tenure as director of diversity. And while he didn't know how to do it, he gave me the monies to make it happen. And I think so. I think it was very, very positive. It was slow, and that's not to say we still don't have a lot more to do, but I think it did have a positive effect.
And I was gonna add to that, or include that this was local. And then afterwards, I would say all across the boards, academically, that's the kind of impact that it had. Each institution was looking inward and thinking about these numbers, thinking about the personnel, thinking about the workers. And so you had an increase academically all across the boards, where people were asking those questions. Well, what is it that we should be doing? And this isn't something that's immediate. This isn't these big numbers at first, but this is part of the legacy of the strike.
So an interesting question raised, is the health status of African descended people different? Has a medical university stepped up to do things differently? What role has a medical unit? These are all questions I think are part of our ongoing discussion. What role has the medical university played in the gentrification of the city? All those questions are linked, could be linked to a future discussion.
Just with respect to the history of the strike and the background of the 60 women, first of all, I'd like to see something done to recognize all of the women who were in fact involved. We generally talk about all of the folk in the leadership positions, but without the fact that the other women, all of the women were willing to put themselves and their families, their economics at risk, I think is significant. The other thing is that this really wasn't the first time that African-American women stepped out in Charleston. You go back to the American Tobacco strike, that was really where Black women who were the primary workers there, decided that they were going to push for better wages. And I'd like to find out, whether any of the women who were now working at Medical University, because the American Tobacco factory had already closed, were any of them either workers at the factory or children of workers, so that they had this kind of incentive. So you start there, then you understand what happened with Septima Clark and losing her position in the 50s. Then you come to 1963, which was the civil rights movement, hot summer in Charleston. And then now you have 69, which is just 6 years later, that these women decided to step out and assert, rights that because of the abuse that they had been taking over all this period of time. So I'd like to see what the connection is, and perhaps talking to some of the survivors might give us some clue as to and who organized, who started to talk about a strike. This stuff doesn't just, happen one day. I mean, there has to be some effort, and, capturing that, I think, is what historians really need to do, because it's like everything else. I mean, Dr. Bell talked about, the fact that he had, before he came to Charleston, he'd already desegregated a school in Upper State. He'd already been engaged at South Carolina State. So it is the background that you find in all of these movements, all of these historical situations where there is a buildup to it. And I'd like to know, more about that. And just to Gwenny's point about what happened, well, right after the strike, you had several Blacks who were elected to the South Carolina legislature for the first time. Then city of Charleston underwent a lawsuit that redistricted the city council, where you had at least 2 Black women who this is 1975, who became members of the city council. You had 6 Blacks elected out of the new council out of 12 Blacks. So you ask what the impact was. Locally, all this stuff started happening. Margie Amos Frazier, Lonnie Hamilton became chair about 10, 12 years later of county council. So you give these women credit because it really upset the status quo in Charleston. And I think that's, part of the story that we miss. We don't even figure out, how all this stuff happened in the 70s within the 10 years or so after these women stepped forth. So their impact, as far as I'm concerned, as a local person, was far beyond, the fact that they didn't get all of what they wanted at medical university, but so many other things happened to call the attention of the plight of African Americans in Charleston.
So I want to build on answering your question, Gwendy, and confirm what you just said, Arthur, that other things did change, and it definitely was in government, and it was big changes in local government, and there were some changes in state government. I worked for the State House in 74 to 1980, and we had many African American members, and we had at least, I want to say, 3 from Charleston delegation back then. What didn't change, and which I think still hasn't changed much, is open doors to African Americans into corporate business in the area, in private sector. I think that has remained a really closed society and a closed door. And so I think that is something that those ladies didn't change. And I don't think we've changed that much. Well, maybe a little bit in the last decade, but still not much. That's a tough one. I don't know how many of you get the Post and Courier newspaper and you read the business section where they have the photographs of all the people in the, okay, you know what I'm talking about? Okay.
Go ahead.
From a bigger perspective, and one of the things we talked about, even the history of the church, when we think about Coretta Scott King coming in 69, the death of her husband in 68. And this is the first action that the Southern Christian leadership is taking up following the death of Dr. King. But at the end of the strike, this now almost becomes one of the last major actions that's done at that point. So that's something that I remember historically. We had this participation and momentum, and these were things that were going on all the time. And then we have the death of Dr. King, and it's the first action is taken up, but unfortunately becomes the last following that as well. And Dr. Bell knows we had an opportunity to sit just last year with Juneteenth with, I think, at least 4 of the nurses. So they're there at that time to hear in their own words what went on. So we got a way to get to them. I want to make sure we understood that. Yeah. And we talk about sacrifices, but to hear in their own words, they lost everything. I mean, people lost homes, didn't have places to go back into. These are the people who were involved in the strike. So they hear these things in their own words of the sacrifice that they made. And Judge McFarland, I'm interested in the same things too. You went back to cigar factory. I'm thinking about riots here early on in Charleston, even all the way back to Red Summer. So I'm trying to link how it comes about. But I wanted to make sure we understood that last action. That was it.
The other thing that I don't think people really appreciated was the role that the church played in supporting these women and giving a place of refuge for people who came out of town, because there were a lot of church rallies that went on during that time. I remember very, very well when they shut the city down. Curfew started at 6 o'clock in the afternoon because they were afraid that there was going to be an explosion of bad behavior. Interestingly enough, that did not happen. The explosion that everybody was looking for, it never happened. The other thing, to your point, Arthur, the March on Washington had already occurred. Dr. King's Poor People March had already started and was over with. So it served kind of as a background. And I would imagine that these ladies, because remember now, these ladies were very young women at the time. They were LPNs, licensed practical nurses, at the time. It was very unusual for an African-American woman, at that time to be a RN. But they were LPNs doing RN work, okay? And that was the thing that kind of drove them to saying, we ain't gonna take this no more.
So, other questions? Judge, the last thing? Judge, the last thing?
But the other thing in terms of the church, and I know, you know, he constantly sends out email these days about this, but the United Methodist Church brought Robert Ford here as a lead organizer. And I don't think we can overlook the impact that Robert had post-strike. He was brought here as an organizer by the United Methodist Church during the strike, but he stayed here. And there really is significance to the work that he did, and you know, notwithstanding controversy near the last decade or so. But the fact is that he did make an impact in terms of the continuing organizing efforts on a number of levels for African Americans. And he even tried the economic piece, but you know, certainly without the kind of success that he had in the political realm. But you know, that was one of the folk who came here in the strike through the church and stayed here. Everybody else, you know, left to go elsewhere, but to their other movements. But I think that's something that can't overlook as we have these discussions, and he deserves the credit and the attention for what he did during that time.
By the way, Ralph Abernathy was the other person. It was Ralph Abernathy, Ms. Kane, and Andrew Young, who led the strike when it was here in Charleston. They were out front. I remember that very, very vividly, because I've been hearing about these people, and it was my first time seeing that they were very real people.
Just an observation. It's wonderful to know that the women were out in front of this movement. I would love to know the role that Black men played as supporters during the movement. We're so used to having men out in front. I would love to hear their side of the story. And also, as far as the women are concerned, if those nurses are still in our midst, that we capture their voices, memories, recollections as soon as possible. We tend to think that we always have time, but we don't always have time. And I think that it should be a matter of urgency to get that job done. I will. I'm L.A. Parker. I'm a reporter from Trenton, New Jersey. I've known Mr. Harris for 30, 35 years. I'm a columnist for the Trentonian newspaper. We're down on vacation with my girlfriend, Laura. He invited us here, and we almost didn't come because we felt we might be underdressed because we're on vacation. We didn't bring clothes, but we did not want that to deter us from missing this wonderful event. We're fascinated about the topic, the history, and we've had a wonderful stay here. Jerry has been a friend of mine for a while, and it's nice that he made the invitation. But I would suggest that we act quickly and get that done as soon as possible. So.
Yeah, I would second that. Certainly, even before we leave, let's start writing something down and at least identifying some people and go from there. We have this institution that has always supported ASALH, so we know where we can work from in terms of the foundation. Yes,
I think,
and earlier I was looking at Arthur, and I thought he would be the fourth person sitting nearby. So I'm just glad that you. I know, but I'm glad that you added so much, because those are the things that we don't think about when we're talking about this whole period. And in terms of resistance, there are little things that add on, and before you know it, they become very big things. And many of those who sacrificed and had participated as members of the strike, they were just going for something about respect. And we don't see how important that is because we're still struggling with that in 2022. Just a little thing about respect and how it carried over into these other things. If we're bragging about this great city now, it's on the necks of people who made those sacrifices in 1945 and in 1969. And so let's get a piece of paper together.
So our branch
and identify
historian,
that.
our branch historian has spoken. He is asking those of us who are motivated by virtue of this conversation to begin to create the node of that activity. We will, so while you're eating your chicken salad sandwich and drinking your sparkling cider and eating your cake to celebrate Dr. Woodson's birthday, let's make sure we have that conversation with Donald.
Can I make one other comment? I want to make you aware that Carolyn Murray has already done a very fine documentary, which she received an award for. So a lot of the voices and people that you mentioned have already been captured. And then last year we did a thing for Juneteenth in which 4 of the women participated in the march. So those kinds of things have already been done, but I would encourage us to listen to go back and look at that documentary that she did, because she talked to Bill Saunders. She's talked to Mary Mutre's daughter. I was included on there, and as well as many of the women who participated in the strike.
Well, this sounds like a good project for us moving into 2023. Again, if you will connect with Donald, and we'll try and organize conversations that are usually user-friendly to continue this, so we can document and do what Dr. Woodson would have us do, which is to delve a little bit deeper to tell the full story, to complete the record, and to correct and complete the record, so that others coming beyond us can benefit from the momentum of historical memory. I want to thank Mrs. Harris.
I was just gonna ask, and would not such a pulling together be right for the next national conference of the state relative to the resistance coming on the Charleston back?
Yes, it would be appropriate for us to do that. So when Don and Arthur and Lee and Margaret and Brother Crawford and the 1967 legacy scholars, right, start going back through the material and culling over and making the connections, I think Arthur's earlier points about the connection of the nature of resistance, and we could start post-Reconstruction, okay, and move forward and be intentional about that, because there's a whole bunch of stuff that could be talked about in terms of post-Civil War and the Reconstruction period, which is a whole nother focus. But we have, I think, some substantial resources here, and look forward to us doing exactly that. Really quickly, like to transition. Thank the panel very much for stimulating how, how we might focus our attention. coming out of health and wellness. Yes, sir.
Tri-County Black Nurses Association that probably benefited from this. You might want to try to improve that.
Good. So, really quickly, there are a couple of announcements. Those of you who have not yet paid your dues, there's still an opportunity to do that at 2022 rates. January 1st, the rates go up. You can do so if you choose to pay directly to National. You pay their portion, your dues to them, and then you owe us a couple of dollars. Or you can pay through our website, and then we will move the money to National for their portion and keep our portion. You also probably know that our late President Julie Monroe's estate has gifted us her art collection. There's some 37 items. Two of them are over here. One to the left is one of Julie's, and we got about 14 pieces that she did. They're unframed. And we have another 30 or so, or 25 or so pieces by various artists that were in her collection. I can tell you that two have already been pulled out of the collection. One, a Alonzo Adams print, and the other signed Alonzo Adams print and a Jonathan White print, Jonathan Green print, I'm sorry. I'm thinking about another person. You know, what we've been able to, so far, both of those have garnered about $150 a piece in terms of sales prices. We had not come to a price point on Julie's pieces. My suggestion is that because the funds go to the Memorial Fund, and we would use those dollars to support student memberships in ASALH, that rates $50 will cover that. So if you're so moved to do that, you can go online, and we will have posted all of the paintings, pictures of all the paintings, but these are examples. Another important thing that's happening this week, there's a group of folks who've been meeting about how to have the African descendant voices be affirmed in conversations about historical preservation, projects that are being done, whether it's the International African American Museum, whether it's the Ancestry Burial Ground Memorial, whether it's the Moja Festival, and the celebrations of Black history and Black that might not necessarily be, there's a sense that the full voice of the African American community is not being heard and respected. And this network's attempt is to work through that collaboration with agencies inside the city and outside the city to do that. The next meeting is on Tuesday or Wednesday, and the virtual connect number there. The group is trying to be democratic with a small d, and there is an interim leadership group, right? Folks are being asked who attend this upcoming meeting have the opportunity to volunteer to be part of that leadership group to shape what this thing looks like and looks like going forward. I can tell you that Lachey and the folks who are the leadership of the Ancestry Burial Ground project are very much centered on this. The Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation Commission, which I co-chair, meets the third Monday of every month. One of the questions of respect of the African American community and the power relationships is centrally focused there. The other things you probably are already aware of. Our February activity will kick off. Our meeting will be the 11th, and we will be having a conversation with author activist Marcus McDonald, who is the leader of the Charleston Black Lives Matter. He has been active he wrote his most recent book, Not on Black History Month, speaks to his engagement with the battle last legislative session to block the CRT legislation. So we'll be in conversation with him. It'll be interesting. A younger brother who is going through some of this organizing stuff for the first time will be in conversation with him. So please check our website, pay your dues, check our website for activities, and thank you very much for coming. If you haven't signed the attendance book, please do so. Just a note on the calendars on the table we secured from the state in their annual publication. Please feel free to take one. And it is our present or early present to you for Kwanzaa, Christmas, or whatever you celebrate this season. If all minds are clear, thank you for coming. Enjoy the
washroom here, and I'll fill out the
You gotta start back at drinks. That is John Hill. Yeah.